One of the oldest music instruments in the history of the world was discovered back in 2008. Archaeologists in southwestern Germany unearthed fragments of flutes made from bird bones and mammoth ivory. Scientists determined them to be more than 40,000 years old. They were found among figurines and other mythic sculptures, painted beads, and a rope-making tool. This would suggest that music goes hand in hand with other specialized behaviors that distinguish modern humans from our hairy primate relatives. In other words, the story of music is inextricably bound to the story of humanity. We've come a long way from that ancient flute. Today, artificial intelligences are getting more and more involved in the process of creating and distributing music. But will music ever get to the point where it can be made without any human involvement at all? Let's find out as we explore the past, present, and future of music. Humans, as far as anyone knows, are the only animals that can not only sing, but can also rearrange the world so that it sings back to us. From the complex melodies and sophisticated harmonies of Western classical music to the fast and intricate polyrhythms of traditional West African music, increasingly complex music has been a cornerstone of humankind's advancement. The first known music storage device is probably this clay tablet from around the 13th century BC. It was found in Ugarit, a city that is today in Syria, but back then was part of the Hittite Empire. Many scholars regard it as the earliest example of musical notation. Many other cultures came up with their own ways of writing down music. The ancient Greek mathematician Pythagoras is thought to have invented one in the 6th century BC. The Korean king Sejong the Great, who also invented the Korean alphabet, devised another. The origins of the modern Western staff notation begin in the 9th century AD as a guide for Gregorian chanting. The notation was simple at first, just like the music, but as composers added more melodies and musical instruments, more precision was needed, and the notation became more complex, a trend that continues to this day. Around the same time that the first notations for Gregorian chant were being written, a trio of brothers in Baghdad were busy inventing something that the world had never seen the likes of: a machine that plays music by itself. Around the middle of the 9th century, the Banu Musa brothers created a flute that was powered by water pressure. Their invention is considered to be not just the world's earliest known music sequencer, but also the earliest known programmable machine. About 600 years later, European inventors recreated this technology to activate church bells. Now it was possible for a trained musician to listen to a piece of music with multiple melodies, write down the score, bring it to an artisan to transcribe to a spiked cylinder, and then have the piece played back on a barrel organ, a music box, or a similar machine. These devices attracted the attention of notable composers. Mozart wrote a piece for a mechanical organ in 1791, and in 1813, Ludwig van Beethoven arranged a performance in Vienna involving 100 musicians and a robot trumpet player. At this point, only one final component of the modern music industry was missing. That element arrived in 1853 or 1854 when a device was created by the French inventor Édouard Léon Scott de Martinville. Inspired by the anatomy of the human ear, Scott stretched a thin piece of parchment over a large horn. When sound entered the horn, the parchment vibrated. He then attached a hair-like stylus to the parchment so that when it shook, it would trace a thin line on a moving surface, sort of like when a seismograph records an earthquake. Now, for the first time in human history, it was possible to record sound. Scott called it the phonautograph. In 1877, Scott's invention was eclipsed by one created by Thomas Edison. Edison didn't have music on his mind when he invented the phonograph, the first known device for recording and reproducing sound. His goals were actually more in line with those of modern telecommunications. He was working on a telephone with a keyboard, an analog text-to-speech device that used mechanical wheels to synthesize human speech. For that to work, Edison would need to know what patterns he needed to emboss on the wheels to produce the sound of each letter. So he built a device similar to Scott's phonograph and began making recordings of his voice. After laboring for months, it finally hit him. He realized that he had in his hands a completely different invention than the one he set out to make. All he had to do was take the human out of the loop, and now he had a machine that could capture, store, and reproduce sound. At last, 40 millennia after an artisan in Paleolithic Germany fashioned mammoth ivory into a flute, humanity had figured out how to make the world sing back to us in our own voice. Things would start moving faster and faster from here on out. 20th century music obliterated the distinction between generating, recording, and reproducing sounds. The sampler, the turntable, and audio player would become musical instruments too. Beginning in the 1950s, the epicenter of this phenomenon was in Jamaica. This was when a new form of live entertainment began to emerge. Radios and record players were prohibitively expensive for most of the population. So when people wanted to listen to music, they would often go to dance halls or street parties, where DJs would set up huge speakers. These setups and the teams of DJs, MCs, engineers, and roadies who operated them are called sound systems. American R&B music was hugely popular in Jamaica in the 1950s. Local musicians fused this sound with elements of traditional Caribbean folk music genres like mento and calypso. This gave birth to ska in the 1950s, which in turn spawned rocksteady in the mid-1960s, which quickly led to the island nation's most recognizable genre, reggae. Sound engineers like Osborne King Tubby Ruddock and Lee Scratch Perry developed a number of electronic effects that are commonplace in music today. These include the use of delay, reverb, and flanging. The recording studio had become an instrument in its own right. When the legendary Beatles retired from touring and became a studio-only band in the 1960s, their use of the recording studio became a crucial part of their sound. Their music pioneered things like double tracking, tape loops, which foreshadowed sampling, and other studio-based audio manipulations. The band's recording engineer, Geoff Emerick, was almost considered a part of the band as he came up with incredible ways to record their music differently, helping create their popular sound. Soon after being hired, he was asked to work on Tomorrow Never Knows. Emerick employed some creative and experimental studio techniques to help what would go on to become a globally celebrated song. Famously, Emerick had Lennon double-track his vocals, or when a performer sings along with their own pre-recorded vocals. Emerick then fed Lennon's double-track vocals through a rotating Leslie speaker, a speaker that was more commonly found inside a Hammond organ. Emerick's never-ending search for the new and different truly set the band's sound apart. As sound engineering continued to grow in sophistication, the music industry saw the emergence of new ways to store and distribute music. Beginning in the 1960s, the phonograph record, which had served as the dominant format since the turn of the century, began facing competition from the 8-track cassette, whose popularity was quickly overshadowed by the compact cassette tape. The first compact disc album was released in 1982, and sales of CDs overtook cassettes in 1991. Their reign would be short-lived, however, as a growing number of households connected to the World Wide Web. Music downloads began growing in popularity in the mid-2000s. In 2012, downloads of albums and singles surpassed the market share of CDs. The internet didn't just change how people purchased and listened to music. Like the acoustics of medieval churches shaped the development of Gregorian chants, the economics of streaming has shaped how songwriters create music. Streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music typically pay a flat rate per song. It doesn't matter if the song is 17 minutes and 5 seconds long, like Iron Butterfly's 1968 classic In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, or if it's 1.316 seconds long, like the 1987 Napalm Death track, You Suffer. As a result, songs are getting shorter. According to one analysis, the average length of a Billboard Hot 100 song fell from 3 minutes and 50 seconds in 2013 to about 3.5 minutes in 2018, and the trend shows no signs of slowing down. At the same time, The music charts have started churning faster and faster. Over the past 3 decades, the number of top albums increased from about a dozen each year to about 40. From the 1960s to the 1980s, it would take about a month for an album to climb to the top of the charts. Today, if an album isn't at number 1 within a week of being released, it's unlikely that it will ever get there. With millions of songs available, one of the biggest effects of the rise of music streaming has been how listeners discover new music. Combining machine learning and human analysts has allowed music streaming platforms like Pandora to develop a complex understanding of the unique elements of an individual piece of recorded music. This understanding allows platforms like Pandora to determine with a high level of accuracy what other songs a listener might enjoy. With human analysts reviewing songs and tagging individual musical elements like tempo or specific instrumentation, we develop a multi-layered understanding of what each song contains. Advanced machine learning helps scale up the work of those human analysts, looking at and documenting the musical structure of millions of songs. We use music to nurture our children, to comfort the sick, and to worship the unseen. Music helps us find romance, sustain love, and recover from heartbreak. Your taste in music distinguishes you as an individual, as well as a member of a particular subculture, ethnicity, nationality, or generation. But music also erases our differences like nothing else can. The divisions created by language, culture, and geography are no match for the unifying power of rhythm, melody, and harmony. While music and humanity feel closely connected, never before in human history has technology had such a huge impact on how music is distributed across the world. Streaming has become the most powerful force in the world of recorded music. Tons of music is made and distributed across streaming platforms every week. With such huge libraries, recommendation algorithms are becoming more important to get new music in front of new listeners. The platforms have a good idea of what you like, and in some cases, when you'll like it. The same kind of technology that powers the recommendation engines used by streaming services is also increasingly being used to produce songs. The cloud-based service Lander Audio, for instance, has become a popular post-production tool for sound engineers. Using a deep learning network trained on millions of mastered tracks, Lander can automatically create a master recording. AI tools are also increasingly being used earlier in the process of creating new music with old artists. In 2021, for instance, a Canadian mental health organization released an album that digitally resurrected the talents of Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, Jim Morrison, and Jimi Hendrix. The tracks were generated by feeding 20 or 30 songs by each artist and training an AI built by Google to emulate each artist's styles. The world has yet to see a full-fledged AI pop star, but that may be just around the corner. Social media networks are seeing a growing number of computer-generated virtual influencers. These include the Japanese YouTubers Ami Yamato, Kizuna Ai, and the musician Kano, the Instagram models Shuru, Ji, and Margot, and the American model and musician Lil Miquela. Some of these characters have released pop songs, and Miquela has collaborated with Flesh and Blood DJs. But like the mechanical clock that played a Handel symphony, these virtual characters are simply conduits for expressing music created by humans. Some musicians are using AI systems as collaborators. One of the first was David Bowie, who in 1995 worked with a computer programmer to develop an app that helped write song lyrics. More recently, in 2017, the YouTuber and musician Taryn Southern used an AI to create backing tracks after programming settings for mood, tempo, and instrumentation. But will artificial intelligence ever create music entirely on its own? Just like with Edison's phonograph, the ingredients are already there, and it may just be a matter of time before humans are taken out of the loop. If and when that happens, it could be possible for machine learning systems to respond to listener data and popular tastes in near real time. The already dizzying pace of musical innovation could accelerate to an unimaginable rate. Some advanced artificial intelligences might even develop their own unique tastes, creating an entirely new audience, and machines will set about making music for each other. with no humans involved. And when that day arrives, the world will have learned to sing in a voice that is entirely its own. For more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell to make sure you don't miss any great content. And look for CuriosityStream on social media. Links in the description.